Welcome, everyone, today to our session on artificial intelligence and open educational elements. We have a presentation here today from Dr. Alec Couros from the University of Regina. We will have some greetings from Mike Gillespie, our AVP of Learning and Teaching, coming up right away. And that's my title card. What I'd like to do is I'd like to acknowledge the land that we're working in and living on. And as educators in these territories of campus, our campuses are located on Treaty 4 and 6 territories and the homelands of the Métis Nation. And as educators on these territories, it's our collective priority to ensure that all learners gain a deeper understanding of our shared histories and contemporary relationships. Our work reflects a desire and commitment to create a reconciled future. So a little bit of housekeeping up front here. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the Polytechnic YouTube channel. So don't let that deter you from wanting to ask questions at the end. We will be monitoring the chat for any questions that you have, and we will be happy to bring those up at the end of the presentation. And we'd like to acknowledge that we are welcoming not only attendance from our colleagues here at SAS Polytech, but also from the international community today. So please keep in mind to stay muted during the presentation so that we're not disruptive to Alec's presentation. We'll go back from the questions. At this point, I'd like to pass the baton to Mike Gillespie.
Thank you, David. David, I noticed you told people to be muted during Alec's presentation, but not during my intro. So I will continue on in any case. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to everybody involved for pulling this together today. And good afternoon to everybody. Nice to see so many folks joining us at lunchtime on a Friday. I think that's indicative of the commitment folks, not just within SAS Polytech, but others have to continuing their ongoing learning and professional development. But certainly the interest in what I think are two real relevant and salient topics, not just for us, but I think the wider post-secondary sector. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity to bring some greetings. As Dave said, I'm Dr. Mike Gillespie, the Associate Vice President of Learning and Teaching here at SAS Polytech. And similar to David, I want to acknowledge I'm joining you this afternoon from Treaty 4 territory and the ancestral homelands of the Métis. It's my real pleasure to introduce Alec Couros to the group. And really looking forward to what I think is going to be a thought-provoking and stimulating conversation. Just to provide folks with some background about Alec, Dr. Alec Couros is the director for the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Regina. He holds the position of Professor of Educational Technology and Media in the Faculty of Education at the U of R. Dr. Couros is an internationally recognized leader, innovator, and speaker who's given hundreds of keynotes and workshops around the globe on diverse topics such as open education, network learning, digital citizenship, and critical media literacy. He's certainly a passionate advocate of openness in education and demonstrates this commitment through his open access publications, his considerable digital presence and contributions, as well as highly successful MOOCs and open boundary courses. Alex has received numerous awards for innovation in teaching and learning. And I'm really excited, particularly to let folks know that we are organizing this session for today. It is part of our ongoing work in relation to professional development on both the topics of open education and artificial intelligence. I'm particularly pleased to share with you that this is being organized and held in partnership with and gratefully sponsored by the U of R's Open Education and Publishing program. Their commitment to education and innovation certainly aligns perfectly with our goals, not only for this event, but I think more broadly in the spaces that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. And I think for us as a province, the more we can continue to drive forward these agendas in partnership, I think the better we're not only serving the students within our institutions, but our faculty and staff and continuing their knowledge and growth as well. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to bring greetings. I will now turn things over to Alec and looking forward to the presentation. Good afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here today over your noon hour. Thank you, Mike, for the kind for the kind introduction. I've got a tear in my screen. Hold on, let me fix that. I just want to make that look a little nicer. There we go. And thank you also for David for the setup and so on, and for helping to host this, as well as the others in the panel as well, Don and Juliet. It's great to be here today. I think Mike's done a great job introducing me. I've been at the University of Regina since back in 1999. I was a teacher before that in various areas, but been committed to the U of R for quite some time. But I get a lot of time to visit other spaces as well, to learn from other universities and institutions. I've been very fortunate in my career to be able to do that. I'm trying to share the screen. I'm hoping it's actually being shared right now. Is that the case?
I'm not seeing that yet, Alec.
Okay, let me try again.
Yeah, I think it's
There we
starting.
go. Okay.
Yeah, we're in.
There we go. Okay, good. A little bit more about me that you needed, even a bit more. Professor, CTL director. I also an open educator. I'm someone who's dedicated to open education. Many years ago, I signed an open education oath to not review or to publish into non-open journals, for instance, and to commit myself to open educational resources. I think that there's a philosophy that's really deep and important for me. I don't spend as much time in the open education space as I did in the past, but this was a really nice opportunity to think about what I'm spending a lot of time with, AI and open education. And I find Mike framing me as this presentation being thought-provoking. I'm hoping so. At the same time, a lot of this stuff is like new in my mind, still percolating. It's not quite ready to go. So you might have to help me through that. So maybe I'll be the one who's thought-provoked for part of this as well. Other than what you learned about me so far, I give myself a generative AI makeover. This is my Facebook 30 years of education sort of image that I put on. My high school friends were, quite ecstatic that I've done so well to glow up in my 50s. I'm also a presenter. I gained another additional finger at one point, if you can notice very carefully. AI tends to do that once in a while, and my fingers on the one hand look a bit gnarly. Those are obviously dead giveaways of any AI picture, although it is getting better as well. Also a CFL player. We didn't do so well last year, but they didn't put me on, and maybe next year they'll learn a lesson and give me some time. Also, I've got 4 kids, so I have to spend some time on the road and singing and performing and, doing those other non-faculty duties as well. So what I love on this one, when I changed the face, when I morphed the face, if you look to the left side, the person in the past also received my face as well. So you can see I'm my own adoring fan apparently as well on that image. So AI is certainly not about exactness and controllability, which is going to be about a bit of a theme here as well today. Is that, we know generally how it works, but to some extent, the control problem is really an issue. In fact, there's a book by that name, which is really thought-provoking, certainly, as well. So I wanted to give a background of what generative AI is and what it isn't, just to start us off, since we're headed into the open education territory. So obviously, generative AI refers to the type of AI that can create new content. And I'm going to contend that idea of new. We're going to spend some time with that idea of new. Of course, it can be text, composing music, images, generating video sequences. If you've seen the new Sora, the tool that's come out, compared to if you want to just do yourself a favor and search for Will Smith eating spaghetti, like last year, there was a video generated which was really laughable. But now you look at it, this new Sora tool that's come out, if you want to look for demos like that, it is incredibly scary how lifelike some of these videos can be. And so I won't show them today, but that might be some homework for you. The generative part here means it's able to generate or produce new outputs on its own, rather than just analyze or categorize existing data. So ChatGPT, of course, is the tool that came out November 2022, so not even 2 years old. It's certainly changed the environment. It's changed the desire for professional development. It's changing the academy and higher education institutions, as well as K-12, in terms of getting people to really rethink how to do assessment. ChatGPT is just generative AI with a nice chatbot functionality that allows you to talk to it in a way that you would talk to a human. If you've got the app and you've got the Pro account, you can also use that to talk. You can speak to it. It's actually quite impressive if you haven't had a chance to it. In fact, maybe I'll give it a try right now. I'll give it a shot. Hey, ChatGPT. Oh, hey, ChatGPT. I'm just speaking to a group of educators learning more about generative AI in education. Could you provide me with a summary of why it's good, why it's bad, just in a really short a couple of sentences or so?
Generative AI in education can be highly beneficial for personalizing learning, fostering creativity, and aiding in content creation. However, it poses challenges such as ethical concerns, potential for misinformation, and reliance on AI that may diminish critical thinking skills.
Sounds good as an intro. It works pretty well. We use it all the time at supper, especially when I'm trying to argue with my kids or a partner or that sort of thing. So it's kind of a lot of fun, actually, to use, and we've integrated into our life in different ways. There's some issues around. So since we're talking about open education, we have to talk about copyright. And I think it's important to understand that there's a lot of fuzzy understanding around training data and copyright. And this comes up all the time, whether it's computer assignments, but certainly when generating content for open education materials, for instance. What exactly is copyrighted? Can we use things like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Anthropic's Claude or any of these tools to actually generate content that's not going to be copyrightable? Well, this is what I've learned so far. So the term large language models is essentially the type of technology that exists that helps ChatGPT to learn, essentially. And you probably heard LLMs or machine learning and those types of terms. Of course, I could generate a glossary very quickly on a lot of these terms, but what's essentially important is we have to first understand where ChatGPT learns from. So this corpus of data, this huge sets of data, they are typically, some of it's licensed, but most of it's publicly available text. So they crawl Wikipedia, they crawl the open web, they crawl blogs. There's a lot of things like Gutenberg where you'll have text and so on. So a lot of the stuff is public domain. A lot of the stuff is copyleft. A lot of it's copyright. Some of it's licensed in some ways. Of course, everything from social media, which is also really important if you want to look for where ChatGPT gets some of its toxicity from. That's probably part of where it's coming from as well. Search engines, and of course, there's also image hosting websites and so on. So understanding that at the core of where this is learning information from is really important for you as an open educator or someone who develops open educational resources. There's been a number of lawsuits. So Sarah Silverman has sued OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, recently. That's still going on, I believe. She believes that ChatGPT studied used her memoirs, for instance. Other authors as well are also coming out and saying, this you've trained on our model and we can prove it. It's hard to prove definitively, but the books probably weren't uploaded to it, but there are so many bootleg books and a number of sites with excerpts from whatever author is out there, that to some extent, a lot of the intellectual property of authors is going to be on the web one way or the other, whether it's intentionally taken up or not, or whether it's intentionally licensed or not. More recently, the Times sued OpenAI and Microsoft over AI use of copyright work. And so what New York Times did was essentially was able to develop prompts on particular stories, and they were almost able to replicate the articles that were New York Times articles. So they reverse engineer it. Now, it may not have been all up and above board. So OpenAI, their side of it, basically says that it would have taken you thousands and thousands of attempts to generate what you generated. So it was more the result of a good prompt, a lot of information, the stylistic aspects of what a New York Times article looks like, and that the content itself might not have necessarily been in the data set that it learned. So there are a lot of other issues that you could, in many ways, reverse engineer a particular style with the content. Of course, one of the things that is really great with ChatGPT is you can say, write in the style of the New York Times, or write to explain it to a 5-year-old. Like that particular aspect is something that it picks stylistically, even with or without the content, the direct content. So that's another thing that's really important here as well. Courts, to summarize, courts have not yet addressed the key question of whether AI training qualifies as fair use under copyright law. So far, judges have dismissed some infringement claims over the output of generative AI systems based on lack of evidence, and that seems to be happening so far. And again, as I mentioned here, OpenAI says that the filing that it took the Times tens of thousands of attempts to generate the highly anomalous result. It's not saying that it wasn't there. They're just saying they're bringing in some deniability at some point. OpenAI also said that it's impossible to train models without some copyrighted content. And so it's important to understand that this is always going to be there because, again, a lot of this stuff shows up on the web. Because copyright today covers virtually every sort of human expression, including blog posts, photographs, forum posts, scraps of software code, and government documents, it would be impossible to train today's leading AI models. So if you are dealing with an LLM, you are in some way dealing with copyrighted material that you may or may not have access to. Now, how the law is going to resolve itself around that is really uncertain, but it's something that's going to be played out in the next little while. But one thing to know is that not all LLMs use or are seen to have used as much copyrighted material. Some do not seem to take as much. So if you look at the list on the bottom, there's a tool from Patronus AI, and they actually have a tool called Copyright Catcher, which is something that you also have to consider, because I can see a tool like this being applied to the LMS on non-open educational resources, that it could easily scan courses, in the future, for instance, and see where there might be some copyright infringement. And that sort of tool, again, with an AI band, is obviously doing a lot better to do this than some of the previous tools. But when you look at OpenAI's GPT-4, for instance, about 44% of the prompts contained copyrighted material. A Mistral is like 20%. Anthropic's Claude is about 8%, which seems to bear the best. It's one of my favorite tools, although you have to use it in Canada, you have to sign up for a beta test, which doesn't take long, but it's a worthwhile tool. And Meta's Llama, which is an open source model, about 10%. So there's a significant difference in terms of how these different models use copyrighted material. It seems, at least this is what this particular tool is saying, compared to others. And so some are certainly veering away from that. And again, I just wanted to, this idea about a tool being out there like Copyright Catcher, this is probably one of many that it's going to come around, that you're going to see that'll be applicable to OERs, something that you may have to look at yourself. But I have to say, look at in particular when developing OERs. Something to also consider. In this, I know a lot of tools, for instance, don't consider things like fair dealing, which is what we'll talk about, or fair use. So even if something is copyrighted material, it doesn't necessarily mean you cannot use it in OER. Of course, AI also replicates human bias. This is, of course, I've seen in lots of different ways, and this is both a copyright issue and a critical thinking bias issue. So there is this particular lawsuit, for instance, Getty Images versus Stability AI. So Getty Images, of course, the stock photo company. Stability AI is the company behind something diffusion, I forget, Stable Diffusion, which is a sort of like DALL-E or even DALL-E or Midjourney, which is a tool that basically generates text-based or images from text prompts. So for instance, there's a particular image. This is the Getty Images version, and someone was able to generate the one on the right. And apparently this is appeared in the lawsuit. And you can see that it even mimics the sort of logo from Getty Images. So you're seeing there's a lot of examples on the web. Some are not verifiable, but you can obviously see the similarity that this was focused on this. And so there's a bit of a case there, although again, this is a case that has not been resolved as well. What's interesting also is that there are implications on text prompts. So right now, a image that you generate. So if you wanted to use, you develop an OER and you want to create AI generated images. So for instance, we can go to ChatGPT, and it's really easy to do that. ChatGPT, and I can just type in something like create an image of a professor sitting in front of a screen on Zoom, talking to educators about generative AI. Okay, we'll try that. Couldn't see the bottom of my screen when I was doing that, so got a couple of typos. But so what's happening here is, if you're not aware of this is ChatGPT 4, the paid version, and it's using a tool that's now been integrated called DALL-E, which basically allows you to generate images in there before going to some other one. So if I wanted to use this in my OER, it's perfectly fine to use this in your OER because it's not copyrightable. So no one can claim copyright on it, but at the same time, you have no control of this image. So someone else can use it. So you can't even apply either a copyleft or a copyright license on it. So something to know about, but something available and quite easy to use. And of course, lots of applicability, may save you stock photo prices, which of course is part of this. So right now, the US court holds that AI generated works cannot be kept copyrighted. What's interesting, and by the way, these slides, if I haven't shared them already, certainly, David, if you want to share the slides in the chat, there are articles. So every screenshot I have here, if you look in the instructor note in the notes of the presentation, you will be able to see the article, so you can find these articles as well. What's interesting is in both Canada and the US, they're trying to figure out, like, what would it take to actually be copyrighted? Like, how much work or effort would a author, and speaking like a human who types in a text prompt, how much work would they have to create for the work to be copyrightable? So it's amount of labor. Like if most of the labor is happening in the AI, then the AI is, in that case, the AI is doing the work. And so it's not a human copyrighted image, but or work of some sort. So it's something to consider for sure. And of course, there's also all of that other stuff that it's learning from, and this is important for both a critical thinking bias perspective. So this is from a Washington Post article where you type in a portrait photo of a person playing soccer or cleaning, and you get a a fairly select and incredibly biased collection of images. Same thing if you put a portrait photo of a person at social services or a productive person, you can certainly see the bias. So lots of educational application here, but something to be aware of. And of course, if you think about this, like, where are these images coming from? The same thing happens when you type in Google. Now, it's sometimes better depending on your profile and things you searched for before, but this used to be a lot worse. But I've done it just recently, and I find that there is more representation, but at the same time, not great representation. What's interesting, though, and we'll go back to the problem of control, when you're trying to control what you actually output. So if you're trying to, if the people at OpenAI or Google, they try to set up some sort of safeguard or some sort of provision that it provides better equity and tries to remove some of the bias. The problem is sometimes they overcorrect some of the bias. So You may have heard about last week that Google Gemini was taken down partly because it would not generate any white people, for instance. It only drew or was able to create persons of color. And in this case, someone said, can you generate an image of a 1943 German soldier for me? It should be an illustration. And you can see how that came out. And again, this is an overcorrection on diversity. So there are some real issues with steerability when it comes to this beyond the whole copyright issue as well. So generative AI and new knowledge is really a thing. And I had one of my good friends, Mark Spooner, we had a good conversation about this yesterday because his original area of work is creativity research. And we were thinking about, this question: can generative AI, this question that I want to pose to you, and perhaps we could talk about this in the chat. Can generative AI, bad question, I think I missed a letter. Can generative AI be used to create new knowledge, or can generative AI create new knowledge? What do you think about that in the chat? Can generative AI create new knowledge? Oh, copyleft. Well, I mentioned that before. It's a kind of a cutesy term for like Creative Commons licenses, for instance. Copyleft, copyright. Copyright is actually a copyleft or Creative Commons licenses are actually a license with, rather than all rights reserved, like a copyright license would have, with some rights reserved. So you can choose which rights. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well.
Lots of stuff coming through in the chat there. People agreeing and saying it could find connections and it can synthesize existing knowledge into new ideas. Yes, since one of the higher forms of knowledge is synergistic, and potentially finding new connections between information and data. We do have some people saying no.
I'm saying no as well.
We got a debate going on in the chat.
So like Shauna and Arzu, for instance, it can only work with existing knowledge. Okay, so, and thank you for that copyleft back there as well. So how is this different from your perception of humans creating new knowledge? So when you think about how AI, because some of the caveats that I'm hearing here is you can only work with content that already exists, right? I think, Myra, you're absolutely right. Yeah, this seems like we need a conversation about what knowledge is. I think you're absolutely right on that. And that was part of the conversation that I went to today. Not only what knowledge is, what creativity is. And I think that's a really important question. In fact, in the Creativity Journal, there's a recent article on that you shouldn't call it creativity when it comes to artificial intelligence. It has to be called artificial creativity, which is a whole other area as well. And so, for instance, like, is this any different? Can do machines create anything more creative or less creative than humans when we think about what creativity and what knowledge is and what new knowledge might be as well? But it's something that we have to think about, because when we think about distinct copyright, when we think about patents, trademarks, all of this other stuff, this is a consideration. And so, and at the same time, as a learning model, we have to understand, what is knowledge, what is creativity? So we go back to those really deeply epistemological questions. So feel free to continue this in the chat. I've got to keep on moving on, but I want you to be able to learn from each other. So feel free to comment on and debate the subject. I think it's a really important piece. What's interesting, and I like Dave Wiley's take on this, and Dave Wiley will be with us in the panel in May, and we'll spend some details on that. Dave Wiley he coined the term open content, which I think he's a pioneer in this area. He posed something really interesting on his blog a little while ago. He says, like, is this any different? So he says, this is how he learns. So the generative AI tool temporarily has access to copyrighted materials when it trains, just like I do when I read. Once it's done reading the copyrighted materials, it no longer has access to them, just like me after I close the browser. In the process of reading those copyrighted materials, the generative AI updates its model weights, kind of like the way my understanding of the world changes when I study. After the model trains on some copyrighted materials, the thing says, in the future, will be different from the things that would have said prior to that additional training, or fine-tuning, as is known in generative AI lingo. If a generative AI asked about any given topic a large enough number of times, at some point it's likely to express an idea in a way very similar to the way that idea was expressed in one of the copyrighted works it was trained on. So I think it's really interesting that the human learning and AI learning, again, AI learning is modeled, or machine learning is modeled after human learning as much as we understand machine learning or human learning, which we still don't very much. But again, these two sort of nebulous models are meant to mirror each other. Can it self-correct? There are some mechanisms in it to some extent. Will it self-correct? That's a bit of a different piece. There is something called fine-tuning, as Dave Wiley mentions here as well. And of course, there are supposed to be human supervisors at various stages as well that helps it self-correct. But eventually, a self-correcting AI, as we move towards an artificial general intelligence, this is absolutely has to be a facet of AI. How it will self-correct, that's the hard part. For instance, we self-correct because new knowledge arises. We also self-correct when we have a moral or ethical compass. So what will that mean for machines? Will they have or possess or inherit a moral or ethical compass? Also, I think it's really important to look at some of the previous things that I've always been big fans of. Kirby Ferguson's Everything is a Remix is a fantastic set of videos that talks about how much of the world is just an imitation anyway. Another one is one of my favorite TED Talks is Larry Lessig, Laws That Choke Creativity. And he talks about how, and this to me was one of the things that really got me into the open access movement in terms of how creativity is something that's often stifled by harsh copyright laws. And if you want to be more of an advocate for open education, this is one of those things that you need in your arsenal. I'm actually not going to watch this video, David. We're going to watch it later, but I think we're just going to forget about it now. But if you do have this slide deck, I have marked it to a certain, there's a certain clip in here where essentially, so this is from the National Film Board. It's called a Remix Manifesto, and it follows the life of a remixer, someone who takes samples and clips, and then he creates new things from them. And he's sitting there with a copyright lawyer, and they're trying to understand whether or not his use of it actually created something new. Like, at what point does something that you've sampled become something new? And it's one of these fundamental questions around copyright that we're still grappling with. That the world has changed. Everything's changed since Napster and the internet and so on, in terms of how we understand ownership and copyright. Sometimes it goes hard to one direction and hard to the other. Sometimes more for the creator and sometimes more for the consumer. But it really is something that's changed. But this is it's a documentary that still holds up. Thanks for that, David. I'm not going to share it right now. So understanding copyright and copyleft, and I know that there's a question around this. And copyleft, thank you for someone posted the definition there as well. So copyleft licenses, or Creative Commons licenses, as they're commonly known, and this is just one set of open licenses. But essentially, when you license something, you have to understand that typically, first of all, when you create something, a tangible work, it is automatically copyrighted. So when you create something new, it's a tangible work, you have copyright because we're under a certain convention in Canada, and by default, things are that. And so if you want to instead give away some of those rights, you can basically adopt a Creative Commons license to one of your materials. So you can say by would be attribution. So on the top left, that means all I really care about is people, they can do whatever they want with this work, but they have to make sure that they give me attribution. They say where it's from. And attribution is really important, not only for just acknowledging the person who developed it, but also you have a link back to the original thinker or creator of that, which is really important. And so the other acronyms here mean, like SA means share alike, so the person has to share in the same way. There's non-commercial. There's no ND is no derivatives. So there's various caveats that you would put on as the rights that you retain there as well. But we also have to understand this code of best practice in something called fair dealing. So this is a new document from CARL, which is, I forget the actual acronym, but they are a Canadian library group. I just forget at this moment. But they put a code of best practices in fair dealing because since we will be using more and more, the greater likelihood of information that will be copyrighted in OER, we have to better understand fair dealing. In Canadian law, there's something called fair dealing. In the US, it's called fair use. But what we have in Canada is what are called fair dealing considerations. Thank you, Danielle. So when we consider what we can use in terms of other person's copyright, so we're getting outside of copyleft licenses, but generally, like if you have a copyrighted material and you want to use it, even if it's in a OER, and of course there's considerations around that, you have to consider the following 6 considerations. Sorry for the iterative language there. So the purpose, for instance, you can use content if it's for research, private study, education, parody, satire, critical review, or news reporting. Then you look at the character, you look at the amount, and you can read these over. I'm not going to go through all of these quickly, but it essentially means like these are the things like how are you using it, how much are you using it, what is the effect of your use on others, and sometimes that effect will be positive, and sometimes the effect will not be as positive. But these are the considerations. But an educator today who is developing OER, from my understanding, you need to not only understand Creative Commons licenses, but you also have to understand fair dealing considerations, because with AI use, we're going to more generally be into the space of using more copyrighted material or potentially copyrighted materials. So just something that you can refer to later on. Well, okay, let's see. Here we go. The other thing, and this kind of gets into the fun part of this, is prompt quality matters. And this is really an important piece. So when you're developing content, if you want to be if you want to be more creative and you want to avoid copyright materials, your prompts better be good. So for instance, if I was a high school student and I said, write an essay about Hamlet's tragic flaw, you are going to get an essay that looks like every other essay on the web. It's going to be very formulaic. It's going to be probably subject to copyright. Not that a grade 12 considers that to the same extent, but if you're going to use that in a material, it's probably going to be more likely copyrighted material. It's going to be very similar. But the more nuanced, the more specific that you get, the more you fine tune your particular prompt questions, the less likely you are going to run into copyrighted material. So these particular terms, clarity, specificity, and sometimes openness, and I'll explain why sometimes in a second, are things that you should look for your prompts. So as an example, so I like this particular, it's called Risen. So when you're creating a prompt, and I don't use this down to the letters specifically, but when I use AI, I tell it about a role. I give it particular instructions. Like what the large scale instruction is. I give it steps, specific steps I might have, an end goal, and then I narrow down. And I only narrow down if I want something incredibly specific. So as an example, and this generally follows the rule, you are a seasoned marketing strategist with a decade of experience in launching successful products. Develop a comprehensive marketing plan. That's your instruction. And then you actually have steps, very specific steps. The goal you have here as an end goal, and the constraints. So that's your your narrowing. You want to basically narrow down. And so when you use a prompt like this, you are going to get a much better experience or much better output than something specifically, and you will avoid some of the copyright glitches that you'll have a problem with. So I have in this presentation a bunch of different sample prompts that you might be able to use. So for instance, and this could be used for either developing OER or just supporting your instruction. And some of these come from Ethan Mollick. And I think I have them. If you look in some of the slides, you should be able to see some of them, or I have them in different places in terms of citation, but some of them I've developed myself. So this one is, you are an experienced teacher and can generate clear, accurate examples of concepts for students. I want you to ask me 2 questions. What concept do I want explained? Wait for me to answer before answering the second question. Who is the audience for the concept? Write a 2-page multi-paragraph explanation of the concept using 2 specific examples, and give me 5 analogies so I can understand the concept in different ways. Now, it's not that you're going to totally avoid this copyright, but you're going to get more likely content that will be more original. So, trying to lose my voice here. And here we go. So if I just ask something like create a marketing plan for X, that's not going to work very well. But what I've essentially created here by sharing this prompt, for some reason my here we go. Let's try this. So I'm going to put in what do I actually want to learn about? What do I want explained? I want to have Pez dispensers explained to me. Dispersers, okay? It could be dispersers then. Thank you for correcting me. Thank you. Second question, who's the audience? My grandmother. Okay. Reading documents, so it's doing its homework. That's delving the explanation. So this would be something if you're trying to create better materials for your class, whether it's in a textbook, whether it's in the LMS or whatever it might be. Again, there's some information here. Some of it will be, you want to double check, but again, you are going to get much better results if you are going to be more specific, as I've expressed here, and more likely to create original material. Okay, so you get the idea. It's going through it. By the way, it's painfully slow at this point. When I look at this, it feels like it's taking so much longer. If you haven't seen, there's something called Grok, I think. Is it grok.com? So this is something that is lightning fast. Oh, do I have to actually log in? Let me try log in. While it's doing that, if I enter the prompt here, I think this is the right one. Oh, it didn't do a very good job. Oh, it's actually doing it really quick. So this is known as being a really, really fast one. And it may create more errors, but you can take a look at it. Of course, it'll create things a lot quicker. Again, so it created analogies, similar for my grandmother and so on. All right, so other prompts that I have here. This one is for curricular design. So you might be a learning designer specialized in building curricula for classes that include direct instruction, active learning, retrieval, practice, formative assessment, low stakes testing, and so on. So again, you can pop in any of these prompts and use them. Here's one for assessment and feedback. This is helping to create diagnostic quizzes. It'll even give you an answer key. And again, the more you use this with specific instructions, the better you're off for both the quality of the prompt, but also lacking some of the copyright material. This is just an example of how you could use a rubric. And I'm finding instructors doing this already. You're having, and students do this as well. The idea that the idea that you can take your work, apply it against a rubric in a prompt is something you can do as well. There's a question in the chat: are prompts privacy protected? And Veronica rightly suggests that only if you turn off your chat history. So in ChatGPT, there's something here. If you go to here, go to custom settings. And then there's something called data controls. And then you can turn off this chat history and training. So that means if you turn this off, your data will not be used in other training data. But if you turn it off, you also don't get a history anymore. And that's on OpenAI's word. I don't know if anyone's going to test them on it, but it's something to be careful with. Whether you're using this or not, I would suggest not using any personally identifiable student information in any of these models. So something to think about. And of course, if you are including information, if you are using information that's student information, I would prefer that people have consent because it is their intellectual property. Although this is something that also is a consideration for things like turnitin.com. Turnitin. This is a really long one. I don't typically put a lot of stuff on slides here like this, but this is again, this is actually not a diagnostic quiz creator. This is sort of a student tutor. I had the wrong. So this is a student tutor. So this, if you actually brought this in, and it's actually really kind of cool. Again, create a new prompt, put this in. It's basically being an enthusiastic and helpful tutor. Although it's not, there we go. Hello there, I'm your AI tutor, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here to assist you in the learning journey, whether it's unraveling mysteries of a complex subject or simply brushing up on something you've already know. Let's start with an easy one. What specific topic or subject would you like? I would like to learn about calculus. I want to learn about, great. Calculus is fascinating. So they are very professional and happy. Am I a professional? I am a gifted 5th grader. Right? So again, you can, you have to remember there's a chatbot functionality here that is really inherent in this, that is really quite useful as well. So lots of prompts to look at, to play around with. I was hoping that you can spend some time on it. There's ones for instructional design. This one is great, for instance. So for instance, that's one of my favorites. If you want to develop alternate text for your courses. So you're in ChatGPT. I'll create a new chat. And maybe you want to upload an image. Let's go to my desktop for a second. I actually have a bunch of images. Sorry, where did I put them? Here we go. And then here. And say if you upload an image like this. Okay, so I'm going to load down here. Oh, I want to get into the a different separate chat window, sorry. So I'm going to upload this image. It's just an image of a sunset screen. And then I'm going to put that prompt in that says, create some alt text for this. And so you can use this, and so use that particular prompt for creating alt text, which of course creates a great accessibility layer for some of the images you may want to include as well. So something else to think about. So some of those mundane tasks that you often do that are really important when you're designing things, really useful as well. Here's one for creating a glossary, for instance. And I just pasted it in because it was really long, but gets really detailed, again, in terms for creating a glossary for any publication you may create. Now, there's another tool, besides these prompts, there's also something called customized GPTs. Now, this is only available in the paid version of ChatGPT, but there's something called Explorer GPTs. And so what you can actually do here is, and this is kind of exciting, especially down the road when this develops a bit further. If I want to, I can create a specific GPT and configure it to, for instance, if I wanted to upload my institution's, all of the OER materials, all of the OER press books that you've created. You can upload them into PDFs, and then you could basically create a specialized ChatGPT that essentially looks at those particular documents and pulls from them. Your accuracy is going to be greater. You're going to essentially have a searchable, inquirable a tool that you can actually access all of the OER in your institution as well. Lots of other really interesting things here as well. I see I've got the 10-minute warning. Other things, for instance, that are to kind of blow your mind. Like there's one that's called Sell This Pen, which is, I just have some, sell me this pen. So this one, for instance, if you upload an image of a car or an iPhone or something, it'll actually create you the text that you would need to sell it on Facebook Marketplace or whatever else. So it's really kind of a neat one. But any of these can be used. So you can put in a textbook, you can put in a bunch of materials, whatever it might be, and you can create a custom GPT that would be targeted at those specific materials, and you could ask questions of it. So you're developing a bit of a custom language, large language model. Other things, to play to learn, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but some really cool features as well that we're seeing that's seen in ChatGPT. So you can upload an image, for instance, and ask it questions of that image. So I'm going to go, sorry, I've got to not go full screen. Here we go. So for instance, if you upload this image and just ask it a question like, what does this mean? So you take a cartoon like this, and you can get some feedback on it right away. Or if you are developing materials and you happen to have access to a particular diagram that you created, you can say, teach me this. And so there's lots of interactive ability with some of these images, for instance, that you have access to. Of course, students can take the bad way out. If they get materials like this, they can just say, solve these. And within seconds, it can solve an entire PDF of math problems, for instance. So we have to understand those shortcuts as well. Other examples. Other examples. This is if you're ever having that parking problem, take an image of this. When can I park here? Or can I park here at 12:30 p.m. on Thursdays? Again, more feedback for you as well. But it's also interesting that large language models actually have lots of limitations. Like I've tried, like any kid at a Smitty's can do this on a Saturday morning. Whereas a large language model that's had billions of dollars invested in it just doesn't find the language to solving something like this. So even understanding what these things can do and what they can't do, I think are really important. Also experiencing with mashups and styles. Like there's lots of things that you can do that generate newer content. So for instance, one person said he developed he did all the prime ministers and as lead singers of 1980s metal bands. So you have like Justin Trudeau, you have Stephen Harper, Jean Chrétien. There's a whole list of them that were done in the stylistic way. Again, all non-copyrightable works, but really interesting and fun to play with these magic features. Some of the critical things you can do, of course, looking at a photo like this, you can actually use ChatGPT or other tools to help you with telltale signs as to why this might be a fake image or not. So even spending time with it in that sort of way, really kind of interesting. I play around with this, create a photorealistic image of a typical Canadian on ChatGPT, and then I say, more Canadian till it blows up. And then you can have a discussion with your class and say, what are they missing around the essence of Canadian? Whose voices are they not, bringing into something like this? What does it mean to be a Canadian? Why are these tropes or memes that come out of this? And so there's lots to be said, and you can again speak to the bias of your large LLM as well. The multilingual capabilities are also really impressive. Think about, adapting any open access material with various languages. So I'm going to just shift here to a second. So for instance, I uploaded a video in English, and then I wanted to take the same video and do it in French. I don't speak French, so that's a problem.
Bonjour et bienvenue à tous. C'est formidable de vous avoir ici aujourd'hui. Merci d'être présent pour apprendre et discuter de ce... Hola y bienvenidos. Es genial tenerte aquí hoy. En primer lugar, quiero agradecerles a todos por estar aquí hoy. Hallo, herzlich willkommen. Großartig, dich heute hier zu haben. Danke, dass Sie sich heute... 大家好，欢迎来到这里。今天很高兴有你在这里。首先，我想感谢大家今天抽出时间来参加。
So
Hello and welcome, everyone.
Oh, sorry, wrong one.
It's great to have you here today. First, I want to thank you all.
So that's just an example of you can take any uploaded image that you or a video that you have and use a tool called HeyGen to just change it into a different language as well. So lots of great examples, and you can take a look at those examples in the presentation if you'd like. Other tools of note, there's a whole other set of tools that I think are really useful. Of course, get to know Copilot. It's coming probably to your institution already. I know it's landed at the U of R. And not to the happiness of a lot of people that it's like built in, but it is here. Gemini, the new Google one, is getting better for sure. That used to be Bard. Check out Anthropic's tool if you like. But even things like Poe, as I mentioned before, Perplexity is one of my favorite tools because it brings in lots of different references. So if you're developing anything, open content or otherwise, this is really good because it does cite references and create citations. If you're looking for scientific literature, Elicit is great. Also Research Rabbit that provides connections. And again, these are things you can look at. If you want to summarize YouTube videos, your students are probably doing this as well. This Chrome extension to summarize YouTube videos, really interesting. If you want your Wikipedia pages read by Snoop Dogg, there you go. Really, really interesting add-on, and just adds to the monotony of reading your assignment sometimes. Lots of other ones. This one is this Smarty one is actually from the University of Calgary, I believe, or Alberta. And it actually has something where it actually does a course inclusivity assistant, where it helps you. It looks you upload your reading list with DOI numbers, and it provides you with a better, more culturally inclusive readings, or assesses that. Uploaded video to Knowledge. This is more of an expensive tool, but it helps you. It creates like all sorts of really interesting H5P assignments. If you just upload a single video that you've done, a lecture or something, you create a glossary for you. I mean, none of these are perfect. You have to check them all, but they're all H5P artifacts. Final thought. I know I got to go. I got like 3 minutes. Final thoughts on this. And, you know, there's a lot of fear and dread in AI in education. And when you type in AI in education and in Midjourney, it always gives you these gray dystopic sort of images. So I had to really play with the prompt to kind of create a more general, you know, happy experience for AI in education. And so I think that kind of signals that we have to also do that as well. There's going to be lots of really negative stuff coming at us, but I think we have to find the good things. So for instance, one of the things I do is I read with my son. He's a really reluctant reader. He's never liked reading, but we prompt things with ChatGPT and make custom stories. And of course, like for instance, we wanted to talk about his fears, and he writes that into a story. And then we changed the prompt to, he didn't like the first one that came out. So he says, that was too easy. Make the story more twisted and harder to overcome the fears. And then, you know, he wanted to make me cooler. So like, make Leo's dad cooler. And like, we just played around with it, and I've never seen him so engaged with reading. And it's just changed our bedtime schedule. And maybe it's not reading like everything else that he might get interested in, but he's interested finally in that creativity piece. So for AI, for me, you know, outside of open education and AI and all of this stuff, it grants us time to reinvest in meaningful interactions with our families, our colleagues, and those we're privileged to serve, like our students. And I think that's a good place to end. And I've got like 30 seconds left. I'll pass it on to Dave. Thanks for listening. The resources are there, but most of all, email me if you ever need me to talk about these things and help you think about this a little bit. I hope this was useful.
I think it was absolutely useful. I think many of us could stay here and listen to you for quite some time. I have the questions slide up. I do want to point out that a poll is being delivered. If you guys could manage that poll before you leave, I would like to see, Alec, if you're available to stay for some questions, if people are able to stay on here past 1 o'clock.
I'm here as long as you need me, for sure.
Okay, awesome. And then I will bring up the next slide here, which just talks about where you can find help. You can look at this reference while we are listening to questions. I'm going to bring up one other slide after the questions start here, and that will be a link to our AI hub here at SAS Polytech. We have a team of people from learning and teaching that have been putting together resources and are trying to keep a current touchstone of information for you that you can use here at SAS Polytech. So having said all of that, let me open up the floor to questions. I do have one from the chat that I'll start with. You believe that what was created is new content not pulled from others' work, and that was when you were doing some of the image generation. And then there was a follow-up comment to that in concerns to the licensing being violated. No, but AI is pulling from human-generated content, claiming that, well, it's AI generated, so I'm not violating copyright or licensing by using it. Seems like a way to launder information content in order to avoid correct licensing. So, Alec, do you have any thoughts on that?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, so what they were talking about is the images that were created by AI, they were obviously or potentially pulling from human-generated images already. So at what point are you not able to stand behind the excuse of, well, it's AI generated, so I don't need to cite it to avoid correct license?
So I think if things are really similar, then there's going to be some contention. Just like in the one case I showed with that one that was obviously from like Stable Diffusion did something that was actually almost a mirror replica of another Getty image, for instance. So there are certainly issues like that come up, and there are going to be. I mean, stock imagery is a business, and whether you like it or not. there's individual photographers that get paid for that. And so, we're circumventing an entire industry in many ways. So I have, good and bad understandings about that. From what I understand is the way that they're trying to generate these is they're trying not to replicate, but you don't fully know how close your image is to another image that's been created as well. The way there are ways that you can do this better, and there are ways that you can, for instance, I'll give you an example. So if you take a image of us, so I'll have to share my screen again.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. So for instance, if no, I'm saving my whole share desktop. Here we go. So I'll show you the bad way of doing this, and this is where it becomes an issue. So I will Google sunset. No, I'll find that image that I've used before. So
There was a follow-up in the chat. It was text, I think. So
text, but I mean, text is the same thing. I mean, it's essentially the same idea that, when so I would suggest that it's easier to see or to detect when you're seeing an image when of course, when you're pulling from other material. There's absolutely no contention that you're pulling from other material. How similar it is to that, to other material is obviously the issue. So if you wanted to create, and it depends on what you do that. So with fair dealing, for instance, if I create Star Wars fan fiction, I'm either, because it's located in the US, I'm following under fair use, satire, or parody exemptions. And the same thing with fair dealing, you're still under that same legal structure that you can do that. Now, if you were to sell that, it becomes a bigger issue, of course, because that's the effect of the dealing and so on. So there are some issues, and it is a way of, obviously you don't want to create something that's exactly like that. I know the other day I tried to get ChatGPT to write me or to read me a poem that was even in the public domain, and it just stopped. It actually said, no, I can't read this because of copyright issues. And it shouldn't have been, it was a public domain. It was do not go gentle into that night, or into that.
Well,
so it's absolutely by, is it Dylan? I forget now. Totally. Anyway, I tried to get to read that, which is absolutely under the public domain, but it still wouldn't read it to me. So sometimes it makes mistakes like that as well. But even like if I do, something like I was doing with the alt text. So if I go here and I take that image and I say, describe, so maybe this is a stock photo image that you want to use, but you don't want to pay for it. So describe this image with a prompt that I could use for DALL-E image generation. I think I worded that a bit wrong, but so basically what you can do here is you can reverse engineer the prompt, the image if you wanted to. So if I didn't want this to use this image as a prompt for DALL-E image generation, that's not what I wanted to. Just here, it comes up with the same result. So I can describe this image. So in the sense, I'm circumventing copyright here, and here we are on recording. So I can just say create an image like that, and so we'll see how similar those things are. And so in a way, you could do this with text as well. So it's the same idea that you could say write something in the style of, or write something very similar to, and the guardrails are either going to cut in or they're not. And then you play around with those guardrails. So there's lots of ways of doing this. Like there's been a number of prominent hacks of ChatGPT where you got it to do something where it would do nothing but swear like a sailor, basically, kind of thing. So like that's very similar, right?
Yeah.
And so you could get around, using something that you see with a watermark. You could say remove the watermark, whatever else, if it lets you, but the same idea. And so there's lots of ways to certainly get around this, but if you do this well, if you do proper prompting, if they're creative, if they're, if they're new, if they're more in line with your thinking, there's also something called incremental prompting. I'll give you another example. Sorry, I'm spending a lot of time on this, but so
I
I'll
think
give
it's
you an example
important.
here.
I have lots of
So-
questions. I could keep this going on for a
Oh,
long time.
yeah.
But
So incremental prompting. So
yes.
I'll give you an example, but I'll just really quickly. Incremental. And there's two types of prompting. There's incremental and there's iterative, and they're slightly different. So as an example here, if you can still see my screen, right?
Yep.
So if you wrote basic prompt, I want to write an outline of a paper about the concept of surveillance in Shakespeare's Hamlet, okay? Or if I use this prompting where you're sort of incrementing and sort of like seeding information into that, and you still end up with the same result, it's going to give you a very different result. And so this is the type of thing we need to ensure that we're not violating not to ensure, but to better ensure that we're not violating copyright and we're creating original things, is to do things that are more like this. And of course, I think that's a really important thing, is we want to get better output, and for one, but at the same time, we want to avoid copyright. The problem with this as well is this one is probably much more likely to get past the Turnitin AI detector than this one. So as we get better, we're rewarding students who may be using this tool who are just good at AI.
Yeah.
So again, there's lots of issues here. So, but again, hopefully I somewhat answered that question.
I have another question in the chat that I'd like to get to, and Arzu, I'll get to you next. One of the workflows that we're going to be using at the institution, obviously, would be making questions for question banks. One of the questions that came in was, I want to train ChatGPT to generate test bank questions. And they're curious if you have suggestions or experience to share around that kind of workflow.
So I'll go back to the presentation and I'll give you an idea. So, and again, it's a matter of the prompt being, let's see, multiple choice. I think I chose. Okay, so here's a prompt, and as an example. So, so I'll read this. Go to my ChatGPT. Okay, so it says, you are a quiz creator of highly diagnostic quizzes. You will research how to develop low stakes testing and diagnostics. So I'm telling ChatGPT to learn more about this, right? You will construct several multiple choice questions quiz to audience, and I could say 15 or 20 or whatever else on the subject of, and I want to choose a subject. Any subject out there? Anyone?
How about raising puppies?
Raising puppies, okay? Questions should be highly relevant and go beyond just facts. Multiple choice questions should include plausible, competitive, alternative responses, and should not include an all of the option. So I'm also putting in some information. I'm teaching it. This is how you might create better diagnostic quizzes. At the end of the quiz, you will provide an answer key and explain the right answer. So let's try this. And so again, quiz bank. The more you do this, the more likely it's going to be more original. The more that you refine and quizzes. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be out there or something very similar. But I'm guessing that a lot of the test bank questions are going to be out there that are going to be very similar from textbook to textbook as well. Right, with some exclusions. So you can see here, so I think it's going to create maybe 5, and it's going to create you a test bank as well. Of course, you need to check these. Like, I have no idea whether these are right or whether they're good. It's important that we take that we take responsibility for it. So I don't know if you saw the other day, there was an Air Canada lawsuit, but Air Canada, there was a bot on the site, and the bot told a customer about the customer came to the Air Canada site and said, someone died. I'd like to apply for your bereavement policy, but can I just buy the ticket and then get a reimbursement later? And the bot said, yes, you can go ahead and do that, which was not the Air Canada policy. So this person sued them. Air Canada was saying that bot has nothing to do with us. It's an independent agent, even though it's on their website and they brought the bot in, but they're saying it's an independent agent, which more and more you're going to see companies sort of like separate themselves from the bad AI advice. Air Canada lost the suit. The judge ruled that this is, of course, part of the Air Canada policy, but it could have been done better as well. For some reason, that chatbot wasn't well configured. It should have like pointed right to the policy and been steered better as well. But these things are going to happen all the time. Or if someone is trying to, you can't submit an article and make AI your author, because AI can't have accountability for scientific ideas. Like you can't say, "Oh, it wasn't me. I'm just the co-author." The primary author was ChatGPT. You talk to them about their conclusions on vaccines or whatever whatever it might be. So you have to have a person that is accountable for the ideas that it generates.
I have another question waiting in the banks here. One of our colleagues, Arzu, here would like to ask a question. Go ahead, Arzu.
Arzu, good to see you.
Hi, Alex. Thank you very much. That's very interesting, really. I just maybe just a little bit philosophical question. When I was a child, I was going to music school, and I was sure that I would become one of the famous composers. And I started composing the music, and then I was recording and listening, and I noticed that I already listened to this music before, so it's not original. But from other side, I didn't insist. I didn't intend to violate the copyrights or whatever. If I express that music as my own, maybe I will be fair, because again, I didn't copy but I've heard that music before. From other sides, when I teach physics, I give example like how the objects are falling down. I've heard that, I read that. I'm not 100% sure that it's my own example, right? It's still, but from other sides, it's kind of again, the copyright is not. I'm against the copyright. Don't you think that in general, we have to rethink that copyright things?
Yeah. Well, it's very much a Western ideology, right? And that goes back to like if you think about, and this is often issues that we have when students, and we think about academic plagiarism from a Western dominant ideology, the idea that, and even getting into sort of indigenous methodologies and worldviews, the idea that discourse can be owned, right? Like knowledge can be owned, that it doesn't belong to the community. This is very much and part of it came from like when we look back several decades when the U.S. exported all of their low-cost jobs to Mexico and China and other countries. We focused in North America, in particular, mostly in the U.S., focused on the idea of intellectual property as being this is more important than all of these other jobs out there. And so there's a real focus on there, and of course, the industry really pushed back on this. But we know that, if you take the example of Disney, and that's actually in that one RIPA Remixers manifesto, it actually talks a lot about how Disney is just public works. But then Walt Disney said, I own this stuff now, and I'll sue you forever and ever. And, people have been pushing back with like sharing Mickey Mouse, for instance. There were daycares that had used Mickey Mouse and Disney characters that were sued for patent disagreements and stuff, even if it was just very innocuous use of those tools. So I think copyright, of course, is, to me, in the digital world, post-internet, is a very outdated phenomena, but it's a very powerful idea with a lot of money backing behind it. And so I really like open access as a way, because open access open access and Creative Commons doesn't disregard copyright. It relies on copyright. So it's ingenious in the fact that it actually needs copyright to exist. So it doesn't kill copyright, it needs it. But it allows an author to say, you can make work on this. You can build on this work. All I want is attribution. And some people, that's all they want. And that was big, when it comes to music, your music example, that's why, back in the, 20 years ago, Nine Inch Nails put out all of their music out on iTunes so people could play with it. And Radiohead said, you don't have to buy this. You don't have to. You can download our album for $0, or you can pay us $100 if you want. You know, you pay whatever you want for it. And I think, you know, Napster changed all those things. You see more and more creativity. Most of the lawsuits don't come from artists; they come from publishers, and I think that's something to be aware of as well. Those who have bought the exclusive rights for these things. So I think, you know, copyright, in my understanding, and I'm a bit of a well, an anti sort of ownership thing when it comes to intellectual property. But you know, that's my thoughts on this. So I might be radical in my views, but I think you're right. When you hum a tune, you know, when you've heard things before, it's likely been, you know, at some point in your ear because you've listened to something before. Like nothing comes out of nothing.
Well,
I think that's that everything are remixes, and those two documentaries I showed are really good at that.
So what are your thoughts then? At what point, if you've started with AI generated images, but you've modified them and you're attributing that you got original content from the AI, at what point can you copyright it again after you've modified it? Like, do you have any thoughts on how far you need to modify something before it can again become
Yeah,
copyright?
you know, that's going to be up for copyright offices.
Yeah.
There's one case in Canada. Like all of this, the thing was, you and I and everyone here can talk about, you know, when something should be copyrighted or not, but it's never up to us. It's always legal precedent that actually, so we don't determine what's fair dealing. We kind of take a guess. And of course, universities don't want to get into places where they, you know, that are going to be, there's going to be a lot of potential risk. So you play it really carefully, right?
Groups like Disney will push that envelope though, because they're going to
sure.
want to use these devices, but they're also going to want to get their stuff to a state where it's copyright.
Right. And, you know, copyright matters. I mean, the organizations like that, they're not necessarily concerned just about copyright. They're also representing copyright owners. So in other countries, you might call that a cartel. So there's that sort of piece as well that I think we have to be very thoughtful about. With Arzu, when you mentioned earlier, what was I going to say? I forget. There's some point that I was going to attach onto. I forgot. I was going. There's something that made me think something. Anyway, I can go do another question.
There's one last question in the chat. It was just, can you feed a page of content in and have it generate the questions from? I think you did touch upon that with some of the different engines that you were going through, but that is a question.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you a great use of it. So one, you know, so I'll give you an example. So I know a student that here, if I go to Queens, and not to pick on any particular faculty member, I'm sure this person's really good, but since it's online, Queens syllabus English. And so I heard of a student who went to and had this class recently. So it's a syllabus from an English class at Queens. And if you look at this, I mean, like I personally wouldn't design a syllabus that this long. There's a lot of stuff here, obviously, a lot of stuff. But really, for the student, they felt like they were totally lost. They just didn't. They wanted to know things, so they made this into a document. So essentially, I'll just download this. And again, I'm not blaming the instructor or anything. I'm just trying to state what a student did in this case. So they went to ChatGPT. They uploaded the syllabus. Oh, sorry, I don't want to translate something. And they go like this. And where's the syllabus here? I think it's on my desktop. And then you ask it questions like, how do I complete and submit the first assignment? So, you know, I think it's really important that we read the syllabus, but when it's like, you know, 70 pages long or whatever this is, it becomes more difficult, and sometimes you just want to interact with it. So any person could take any OER content, any textbook, anything that they can upload, and ask that document questions. In fact, there's a tool specifically for this called Ask Your PDF. But you can do this now, of course, right in ChatGPT, and you can use this to a point where it's free. But I like this because it actually will give you the information that you need. It's based on the document. Because it's based on a specific document, it's going to be more factual than taking it directly from an LLM. So you're basically pointing it directly to the syllabus. Again, it's going to be less likely to hallucinate and not give you factual information, but still you need to do this. Doesn't matter if the PDF is text. No, you can do it. It'll do optical character recognition and recognize that it's the text in there as well.
So,
Shauna, I didn't know that about Acrobat. So thanks, Shauna.
so I think that exhausts all the questions that we've had in the chat and from people on video. So what I'd like to do is take the opportunity, Alec, to thank you very much for your time today, and thank everyone who was involved in the planning of this session, and thank the University of Regina for keeping us involved in your presentation today. It was fantastic, and like I said, I think I could talk to you for quite some time about the ramifications and parameters around these things. So maybe at some point in the future we can touch base again as a group and have some brainstorming around these subjects. So thank you, Alex.
So always happy to help, and thanks everyone for coming and sharing some time with me. So you can always contact me. Easy to find on the internet. alec.curros@uregina.ca. So thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.